Hello everyone, this is Mylene Benaflor from Bachelor of Secondary Education, major in Technology and Livelihood Education, Home Economics. And for today's video, we will be discussing about performance assessment. So what do you mean by performance assessment? Well, performance assessment is also known as alternative or authentic assessment, it is a form of testing that requires students to perform a task rather than to select an answer from ready-made list. So it engages the students' activities and tasks wherein it requires the application of knowledge, skills, and other forms of activities that allow students to apply what they have learned throughout the discussion. So performance assessment also refers to a form of presenting or creating product out of the said activities. So what are the examples of performance assessment? Well, according to the research, performance assessment includes the following. So the first one is composing a few sentences in an open-ended short response. The second one is developing throughout analysis in an essay. The third is conducting laboratory investigation. The fourth is curating a portfolio of the student's work. And last one is completing an original research paper. So performance assessment is not just about listening and analyzing, but also it involves a form of activities just like, for example, illustration, demonstration of object, and other forms of action that allow students to participate in order to have deep understanding based on the experiences they have. So now let's proceed to the different characteristics of performance-based. So performance-based assessment requires sustained work. So it also uses clear criteria and rubrics for scoring. And aside from that, it also allows students to perform, create, construct, produce, or do something out of the activity given. So in performance assessment, the students will explain, justify, and defend their activity. So the student also allowed to use or apply their reasoning skills. It also engaged their ideas, which is important for any substance. And lastly, it has no single or correct answer. Okay, let's focus into the performance assessment, specifically in developing rubrics. So what is rubrics? So rubrics is typically an evaluation or tool or a set of guidelines used to promote the consistent application of learning expectation, learning objectives, or learning standards in the classroom. It is to measure their attainment against the consistent set of the criteria. So rubrics is a form of scoring guide that includes a scale that spans the different levels of competency. So let's proceed to the developing rubrics. So there are two types of rubrics. The first one is the holistic rubrics, and the second one is the analytic rubrics. So according to the research, holistic rubrics consist of a single scale with all the criteria to be included in the evaluation being considered together. So with the holistic rubrics, the rater or the judge is assigned to use a single score. So usually 1 to 4 or 1 to 6 point scale based on the overall judgment of the student's work. So holistic rubrics is a form of category which contains several criteria. So its purpose is to give the overall rating of the performance. So specifically, as a home economics major, some of the activities which belongs to the performance assessment are cooking, sewing, table napkin folding, rating, or creating dish garden, and other types of household activities. So developing holistic rubrics is very appropriate, most especially for the purposes of summative assessment. So there is also advantages and disadvantages of using holistic rubrics. Okay, so for the advantages, the judge can easily score because they're just going to observe the overall performance. But on the other hand, it only reveals a little specific information. So this is the example of holistic rubrics. So as you can see in the table, it has two columns which indicates the rating scales and the description. So if you were going to judge a certain performance or activities, it will not be hard for you to rate since that you will just going to observe the entire performance and the outcomes. And we also have what we call analytic rubrics. So analytic rubrics resembles a grade with a criteria for a student's product listed in the leftmost column with levels of performance listed across the top row, often using numbers and or descriptive tags. So when scoring with analytic rubrics, each of the criteria is scored individually. So, in analytic rubrics, each criterion receives a separate scores. So, analytic rubrics provide better diagnostic information and feedback to the performance of the students. So, it is very useful, most especially for formative assessment. So, it measures the strength and weaknesses of the performance of the students. So, the difference between holistic and analytic rubric is that holistic rubrics has only a single criterion. It is used to assess the participants in terms of the achievement on an activity or item, while the analytic rubrics is two-dimensional with levels of achievement as columns and assessment criteria as rows. So, this is an example of analytic rubrics for pinatatasang manok. So, as you can see in the tables, it has 5 columns and 4 rows, which indicates their criteria and the individual rating scale. So the disadvantages of analytic rubric is that it takes a little longer to create or formulate a score. Okay, so in performance assessment, developing or analyzing rubrics is very important. Why? It is because rubrics is very useful, most especially in rating the performance of the students. So using rubrics, the teachers or the judge can easily determine or identify the performer if he or she really meets the certain standards of the specific test. So, rubrics serve as a guide for the development on the presentation of the engagement in the particular activity. So, it is not just focused on the performance itself but also to the product and the outcomes. And that's the end of my discussion. Thank you for watching.